Today's video is going to address one of the most frequently asked questions I get on Fully Nourished, which is how does this apply to men? Or how does this apply to my husband? Or how does this apply to the man in my life? And I thought this was such a fun topic where we can kind of dive into a little bit of where men and women's bodies differ, and also how we can translate what we're learning in Fully Nourished, or if you're just new to my page, what you're learning on my page, how you could apply that to the man in your life. Hey guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel. I'm so happy that you're here. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Jessica Ash, and I'm a functional nutritionist and just a general hormone nerd. I love to connect biological truths and educate you about your biology and your physiology so you can really learn to understand your metabolism and then take that information and then apply it to your life to actually increase your quality of life. If you like what I talk about in my videos, remember that my signature course, Fully Nourished, really is a culmination of everything that I teach. It's kind of more of a blueprint or an action-based program that helps you implement everything that I teach so that you can learn what you need to learn to restore your metabolism and balance your hormones using nutrition. But with that being said, let's dive in and let's talk about men for a second, which is kind of refreshing, right? Since we always talk about the female body. Now, one question that I want to answer that I get a lot before we dive into this is, does your partner, does your husband, does your boyfriend, does your fiance, it's my fiance, eat the same way that you do? Or how do you find someone that eats the exact same way that you do, or who eats pro-metabolic? And I want to be honest with you and say you're probably not going to find that person. And what I mean by that, before your heart just drops and you say, oh gosh, I really wanted my pro-metabolic soulmate, I think it's more important to find someone that values the same things that you do. So maybe they won't always believe the same things that you do on every single level. Obviously, you're going to want to find someone that believes the same things that you do on the important things. But sometimes with food and nutrition and health, it's actually better if somebody values their health over believes exactly what you believe. Because at the end of the day, you're going to achieve the same things. And so if you value your health and you are achieving it in a way, and he values his health, he's going to notice that you're valuing your health and you're achieving it in this way. And he will probably learn from you just like you probably would learn from him. So instead of looking for someone that has the same opinions and the same beliefs as you, I would encourage you to actually find someone that values the same things that you do. But this video is going to be more about if you already have a partner or you want to help your partner out and you're like, I don't know what to do with him. Like, how does this apply to a man's body? Does this apply to a man's body? I'm going to talk about the differences between the female biology and male biology and how we have a different type of rhythm, and then how that actually translates into taking the stuff I teach in Fully Nourished and kind of this pro-metabolic or for your metabolism way of eating and how that translates to a man. And I'll give you a little spoiler alert, it's not that much different in action. So the first tip I'll give you is the principles are the same. We want to lower the stress and increase or support the metabolism. Whether you're a man or a woman, this is important, right? But when it comes down to it, because a female and a male's biological purpose is different, they're going to have different levels of resilience to stress because we have different main hormones and we have completely different rhythms, which we'll dive into in a second. And so remember, where a woman's biological purpose, and remember, when I say biological purpose, I do not mean it is your personal purpose. So we live in a modern world where everything's kind of muddled, where you can kind of do what you want, no matter what your body or your cells are telling you. But when it comes down to it, our cells are often still kind of stuck in what some people may consider traditional roles. I just see it as different, but both very important jobs, whereas the female body's goal is to create life and then sustain life and then nurture life. A male's job or biological purpose is to be that kind of protective umbrella to provide for that life, that little life system, ecosystem, to protect that little life system, that ecosystem, to support and build the community around that little ecosystem, right? And so a male's biological purpose is to provide, to protect, to feed, to clothe, etc., to make sure that the female and the baby are provided for. Now, of course, I know some people are going to come at me for this, but it's just truth. So when we're looking at the modern world and we're seeing how that's translating into our more modern way of living, we need to keep those truths at the back of our mind. And because the male's body fundamentally is concerned with provision and protection, he's obviously going to have a little bit of a different response to stressors than we are, right? And so when we see these fundamental differences, we're going to see that even though men are more resilient to stress because they have less estrogen, a little bit more testosterone, and their infradian rhythm is a little bit different, at the end of the day, the modern world is really, really stressful to males too. And you'll probably see that it often comes out in my work that, the modern way of living is very stressful to women. We no longer really have a community to lean back on. And so oftentimes we're doing everything and we're doing it all alone. And we have, work stress and, children stress and personal stress and traumas we're dealing with and, food stress and weight stress. There's so many stressors. And we have to remember that, men are being exposed to these stressors as well, maybe different types of stressors, and they're just as burdened with stress as we are. But their body and their minds are probably going to deal with it a little bit differently. So the next tip I want you to remember is men are going to show their biological stress in a little bit of a different way than we are. We have a cycle that we can kind of check in on, right? We're cycling oftentimes with the moon every 28 days. And so we have, our period, and then we have a culmination of our follicular phase, and we have ovulation, and then we have our luteal phase. And, the week before our period, which often can be a big indicator of where our health is at, we have that kind of fifth vital sign that we can check in with to see, like, how are we doing? If we have really bad PMS, or, we have a really, symptomatic ovulation, or maybe a really symptomatic period, we can tell, like, okay, there's something wrong. But men don't have this as much, and they're not always as in tune with their body, in tune with what's going on. And so they're going to show biological stress in a little bit of a different way oftentimes. I always say that it often shows up in the head and it often shows up in the gut. And then it also is going to often, because men are so action oriented or behavior oriented, it will often show up in their behaviors and sometimes won't show up as much in their emotions. Now, I'm not saying it won't show up in their emotions, because it often does. Men and women are emotional creatures, and men are often told that they need to bottle up their emotions. So sometimes emotions are actually going to affect their behaviors, or their symptoms or their biological stressors are going to affect their behaviors more than you're going to actually see maybe emotion showing. And so that's really important to remember, is because there's not a cycle to check in with, that doesn't mean that they're not biologically or metabolically stressed. And oftentimes that shows up in the gut, and it's going to show up on the hair. So men often bald or start losing their hair. And yes, it's genetic in the sense of they'll have those genes, but those genes are being expressed by what? Not having enough nutrients, having so much metabolic stress, and then gut stuff often affects men as well. So those are kind of the two biggest things. It will also show up a lot more clearly with their libido. Men are meant to have a robust libido, and when their libido is low, or they have a more physical sign of their virility, right? I won't say the word, but we know they have a more physical sign of their virility. When that's affected, that can be a sign that, okay, instead of being embarrassed about it, or instead of being like, there's something wrong with me, it needs to take a step back and say, maybe the body doesn't want to expend energy on something that's not necessary for survival. So we want to be looking for other biological signs of stress, and oftentimes men are very good at hiding their symptoms. They tend to more hide their fatigue by drinking energy drinks, or drinking coffee, or fasting. They like more stress-based activities to kind of get their adrenaline going, to kind of defeat their fatigue, or they oftentimes will sacrifice their sleep without complaint. And so because they're a little bit more resilient to stress, this doesn't mean that these things don't affect them. It just often means that they will just deal with the consequences and not really complain about it. But this is why men are much more likely to just drop dead of a heart attack all of a sudden. It's because their body is speaking to them over and over again, and they're just pushing it down until their body can't take any more. And that's not to scare anyone. It's just to say that, men and women's behaviors are fundamentally often very different. And so these are signs we want to really look for if we're like, is he stressed? Is he metabolically stressed? There's going to be other signs of metabolic stress, and it's going to look different than what we often look like when we're stressed, which is oftentimes we lose our period, or we have a really bad period, or we have bad PMS, or we can't sleep, or our moods are all over the place. We often have anxiety, whereas for a male, that's going to show up a little bit differently. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about the male rhythm. So where women have a 28-day or monthly rhythm, which really actually mimics the moon cycle, men have a daily rhythm, which actually reflects the day cycle. And this is not to say that they don't have other maybe cyclical patterns, but over the course of the day, a man's pattern is going to change. Male sex hormones will often mimic where the adrenal hormones are at. So, for example, when we wake up in the morning, that's when our cortisol or our adrenal hormones are at their highest. And then over the course of the day, they're kind of meant to gradually drop over the course of the day, and then our energy will kind of gradually drop as well to where it's at its lowest at night. We'll go to bed, and then we'll wake up again when cortisol starts to go up. That's kind of our natural circadian rhythm. And so the male reproductive hormone rhythm looks similar. Their testosterone often will peak in the morning and then slowly decline gradually over the course of the day. This is where the term like morning wood comes from. You want a male's testosterone to be at its highest in the morning. And when they aren't doing well metabolically, that's actually going to suffer. So that can be a great indicator of, okay, how are you doing? How are you feeling in the morning? They should feel usually their best in the morning. And then over the course of the day, that will kind of gradually decrease to where they're at their lowest at night. They need a night of sleep, and then they're going to be recharged for the next day. And so they have a little bit of a different rhythm. They also have different hormones than us. So, our main two sex hormones are going to be estrogen and progesterone. Progesterone for us is kind of that youth hormone, or that it's our virility hormone, whereas for males, it's testosterone is going to be their main virility hormone. They, of course, make estrogen and progesterone as well, but they don't make as much, and so this is why they tend to have a little bit of a lower body fat percentage and also have a different shaped body, because they don't need to have that extra layer of safety to create life like we do. And so what we have to remember about men and supporting men's hormones or supporting men's metabolisms is it's going to look very similar to supporting our metabolism. The only difference that I often see is depending on the state of imbalance for a male, if he is just wanting to optimize his health, he probably is not going to want to eat as often as I recommend for women. The reason for this is men are often what we call gorgers, whereas women are grazers, meaning that men often like to have a lot of food at once, feel really full, and then digest it for a couple of hours, whereas women do often a little bit better because we don't maintain blood sugar balance as well. Our livers don't work as well, just because we have that extra added burden of estrogen often. So it's okay if a man doesn't want to eat every couple of hours like I recommend for women, unless he is really, really metabolically stressed and he's gotten to that point where he needs that extra added support. So you kind of have to determine if he's really imbalanced, he's struggling, like he's not doing well, he might need to balance his blood sugar for a little while and have, 3 main meals and then a little snack in between. But, once a man feels balanced and is doing really well, he probably won't have to eat as often, and that can be very normal. But a lot of people will ask, does the bedtime snack apply to a man? Well, it can. He should try it out and see how he does. Do body temperatures and pulse apply to a man? Of course, he wants his body temperature nice and high as well. Does eating breakfast within an hour of waking apply to a man? I think it should. I definitely think men should support their bodies in that way. I don't think men should work out fasted either, but they might have a little bit more of a resilience to that stressor, and it might not affect them as severely as it affects a woman. But all the nutrients that I teach in Fully Nourished, a lot of people will ask, oh my gosh, if I give him beef liver, will it give him a cycle? No, our bodies are completely different. But we do need equal nutrients. So oftentimes, if zinc is good for a woman and her fertility, zinc is often good for a male and his fertility as well. It's just going to affect you in two different ways. It's going to optimize your female hormones, where for him it's going to optimize his male hormones. So it's important to remember that the nutrients that are taught about in Fully Nourished and throughout, everything that I teach and in the whole pro-metabolic space are important for both men, women, and children. What it helps to do is optimize our own systems, right? It's not actually supporting an individual thing. It's supporting our system as a whole, our cells as a whole, so our cells can do their jobs. And so you don't have the power to manipulate your body to do something different. It's always going to do what it needs to do. You just get to decide if it does it really well or does it kind of crappy. And so that's what nutrients do, is you're replenishing or providing your body the raw materials and resources, and it's going to take those and do whatever it needs to do with them. So all of the nutrients that I talk about in Fully Nourished, those nutrient-dense foods like beef and those nutrient-dense foods like oysters and liver and organ meats, those are all important for not just you, but for your man and for your children. Now, this is a really important tip, and this is going to be my last tip. I read this book, and it was called Force versus Power. And I like to bring this up when people are talking about changing the habits of their family, because oftentimes habits are just that, habits that you've built over years and years and years. You've taken time to establish these habits, and your family's following your rhythm. And so when you're changing habits, especially when you're changing the habits of other people by changing your own habits, keep in mind that you're in front of them. And they're behind you, and they're kind of following the leader. You don't need to force change, and you don't want to force control over, especially your partner. Men don't like to be controlled. I mean, I don't like to be controlled, and men definitely don't like to be controlled. And so, going back to this idea of force versus power, power is leading by example and being a leader in that sense. So if you want your husband or your partner or your man to care about what he's eating, make sure you're choosing a guy, if you are in that stage of life, that values health as you do. But usually if, your guy eats what you make him, you have some power over that situation. You don't have to force him to do anything. And if you guys are wondering what I do on a personal level, when me and my fiance are together and eating together, he eats what I eat, and he values his health. He values having a good meal. Does he value nourishment on the level that I do? Probably not, but he values his health enough to eat what I make him. But then I offer him the respect of making him something that I know he would like. I'm not going to try to force him to eat something that I know he doesn't like. That's not meeting someone where they're at. And so that would be trying to use force or control. And so I just try to remind people, it's better to use power over force and meet somebody where they're at, give them that respect. A man does not need to eat the exact same as you to still benefit from what you're doing and what you're leading by example and doing. And if your man cares about you, he's going to see how much your health is changing from your habits, and he's going to pay attention. Don't worry. Keep in mind, men think differently than we do. We often love to learn and educate, and we love to think about 1,000 things at once. Whereas men often think in a little bit more of a simple manner. They're focused on one thing at a time, and they're also very action and do based rather than theory and feeling based. And so we just kind of have to keep that in mind. If we're getting frustrated, they're often going to respond well to very straightforward conversations and also very straightforward eating principles. So just kind of keep that in mind, and remember that you're going to be less happy if you try to control what he eats or force him to eat certain things that he doesn't like. So try to meet him where he's at, and if he's not at a place yet, don't fret about it. Just give it time, be patient, and focus on what you're doing. Because remember, everyone around you is watching you, and you are leading by example. And that is enough. That is enough. You don't have to do more. There's nothing that you need to do. And at the end of the day, a man's health is his responsibility. And so if he wants to feel a certain way, he needs to take action. You do not need to mother him into it. You do not need to force him to do anything. And you can have your conversations be such, if somebody's complaining to you constantly about their health and they're constantly complaining about their symptoms, it can feel really exhausting at some point to continue to offer solutions and somebody doesn't take any action on those solutions. So maybe think of some more creative ways to actually implement that into your habits as a couple or your family's habits, and make it more fun and exciting. And remember that it took a really long time to build the habits that you're at right now, and it's going to take some time and patience to get to where you want to go. But overall, as a summary, most of the principles in Fully Nourished and pro-metabolic and in the pro-metabolic space are going to apply to a man. He might have a little different preference in habits than you do, but at the end of the day, he still needs the same amount of nourishment. He needs to make sure he's getting enough calories, enough protein, carbs, and fats. He needs to be getting those nutrient-dense foods in, minerals, all that good stuff. He needs to support his liver. He needs to support his gut. Raw carrot salad would be super beneficial. All of those principles are going to benefit him. It's not going to like manipulate his hormones into a woman. That's impossible. And then just keep in mind, you can do what you feel comfortable doing and let that be enough. You don't have to force change or do that to yourself, because it can be really, really exhausting trying to control another person's habits. And really at the end of the day, it's actually impossible. So focus on the times that you are together, the times when you can lead by example, and let that be enough. And then just give it time, because if you guys are in sync and you guys are in a strong relationship where you communicate and you value similar things, over time he will learn. You can't teach everything that you know, all this knowledge that you've accumulated in a day, and you can't expect his habits to change in a day either. So I hope that was helpful for you if you're already a Fully Nourished student, or you're thinking about becoming a Fully Nourished student, or you're just in this pro-metabolic space and you're kind of starting to wonder, how does this apply to men? Fundamentally, men's biological purpose and ours is a little bit different, but at the end of the day, our cells still need the same things and thrive on those same nutrients. And if you like this video or you have children, stay tuned for next week's video, which is going to talk about how to implement this with your children and as a family. See you then.